Good evening, everyone, and thank you very much for coming this evening for, I'm sure, what's going to be an inspiring conversation with His Eminence Bishop Themi, who's visiting us from Sierra Leone, and Father John Chrysavis, who both were, I learned today, of course, they're both from Australia, but they were friends and both central in the establishment of St. Andrew's Seminary in Australia back in the 1980s. So they were co-workers, but they haven't seen each other in 29 years. So it's nice that they're gathered together for us. We want to welcome Bishop Themi. Bishop Themi's not a stranger to our school. He's a graduate of our school from the 1980s, mid-1980s. I met Bishop Themi around 8 years ago when we invited him to come for our missions week, I think 8 years ago. And I knew nothing about him. I just heard that there was this missionary who was serving now in Sierra Leone, starting the Orthodox Church of Sierra Leone, doing some amazing work with schools and orphanages and serving the poorest of the poor. And when he came, he was really an inspiration here at the school the week that he spent, and then in my parish, and he's been traveling around. But it was a real privilege that we could bring him back up here at the school, the Huffington Institute, along with the Mission Institute. We are co-sponsoring this evening, and we're looking forward to all of you learning more about the amazing work of Bishop Themi. I'll just say one other thing. I don't know how much you're going to get into this in the conversation, but in my class earlier today, Bishop Themi shared with a number of students his remarkable journey from atheism, Marxist atheism, coming to Christ in the 1960s and 70s. And it was an amazing story that is truly an inspiration of how God works, even where you're not looking for, because Bishop Themi really highlighted how the last thing he would have ever believed back in the 1960s if someone would have told him that he would be a priest, a monk, and a bishop one day, he would have looked at that as some type of curse that someone was wishing upon him, because that was nowhere in his radar of life, and yet God had other plans for him. So we thank God that he did have plans for him, and we welcome his grace, and we welcome Father John. Thank you very much.
In our planet today, there is no region where a child may suffer more hardships than in sub-Saharan Africa. Every day, some 30,000 children in Africa die of hunger, deprivation, or diseases.
Every day is the same. I wake up and I feel empty.
Before the sun is up, I scour the dumps.
I search all day. Is this normal?
One more day, I lie on my bed. I'm afraid I will never feel full again. Where can I go for help? Food. Hope.
Poverty and unhygienic conditions may often lead to life-threatening diseases for children. The AIDS pandemic in Africa continues to kill millions of men, women, and tragically, children. The devastating effect is that countless of children become orphaned. Without the protection of parents, these children become vulnerable to exploitation, hunger, and diseases. An unfortunate custom in some regions of Africa is the abandonment of children with polio.
This is Esther. At first, I thought she was a boy. And this is her older brother, Sam. Their behinds were shriveled and laced with deep lines left by their shrinking body mass. Their legs were tiny bones covered in dried out skin. It was clear to me that starvation had pushed these helpless kids to the verge of death.
This little boy is 7 years old.
Severe malnutrition leads to death. It stunts growth and forces the body to turn on itself for food. Sam is under 3 feet tall and weighs under 20 pounds. Both Sam and Esther were also afflicted with polio. Neither of them could walk. We could not imagine why they were abandoned, left starving, lying hopelessly in the dirt. As we tried to absorb the nightmare before us and figure out what we should do, a little girl emerged from the bush. This little girl is the sister of those 2 little boys, Jane, a very small 8-year-old. She had walked miles to fetch water in order to bathe her brother and sister. They could only stand in horror and watch. We watched in utter fascination as this little determined girl bathed her siblings. While most 8-year-olds are busy playing, Jane faced a life and death situation alone. She could not feed her hungry brother and sister, but she could see how dirty they were, and it was within her power to take a long walk for some water, lug it back, and bathe the kids. Little Jane, a hungry child herself, assumed the awesome duties of a parent. To look into the face of a suffering child is to see the depth of humanity and the heart of God. Love is all that matters, and love compels us to reach out to Sam and Esther.
In contrast, a tiny minority of the world's population is enjoying life in abundant wealth, pursuing monetary interests, with an apparent indifference to the tears of the African child. Whilst 3 billion people are living on less than $2 a day. About 1/3 of the world's total food production on a daily basis gets lost, wasted, or discarded. The food that we waste in the Western world is more than the total food production of sub-Saharan Africa, and would feed more than 900 million people. That is the entire population of Africa 2 times over. Another aspect of global economic disparity is the inequality of education. Most schools and colleges in the West have facilities that most sub-Saharan schools or colleges could only dream of. By contrast, most sub-Saharan schools have no electricity, no running clean water, and no hygienic toilets. The existence of libraries is also very rare. Currently in Sierra Leone, as in other parts of West Africa, there is a shortage of trained teachers. Many schools have to use unqualified teachers. In particular, this is the case in the area of early childhood education. How are we, the rich nations, addressing the challenge of regional economic inequality? Among the world organizations that are seeking to confront and alleviate the plight of the African child is the Orthodox Church.
So His Grace asked me whether we should have a prayer to begin. I don't know that what we just saw is not a prayer.
Okay.
And I mean, we know the facts. That's the funny thing. We know the facts, but hearing them from your mouth makes a huge difference.
Yeah,
and that does make it sound like prayer.
Yeah.
So, Your Grace, Bishop Themi, Brother Themi,
Uncle Themi.
Uncle Themi. The first thing I want to say is hi. It's good to see you. It's been 30 years. Does seem like yesterday.
Yeah, it does, doesn't it?
We have, of course, communicated, we've emailed, we've exchanged phone calls, we've met briefly, but we haven't sat down to have a conversation. That's why I'm putting you on record here, I'm recording it, putting you on the spotlight. We look forward to hearing what you have to say, because it occurred to me during Vespers this evening that in the 90s, there were some changes in the Church of Australia. In the early 90s, Father Nectarios Kellis went to Madagascar.
And became a bishop.
He became a bishop there of Madagascar, and I remember him telling me that he wanted to go to a place where no other missionary had ever been.
Right.
In the mid-90s, I left Australia. I didn't go to the mission, but sometimes it feels like it's been as hard as that, but
You came here.
I came here.
Yeah.
And in the late 90s, you left Australia.
Yeah.
And you also went to Kenya
Africa.
first, and
Yeah.
then you went to Sierra Leone, where no other missionary had ever been to work the way you have. So 30 years to cover is a bit difficult, but when I asked Brother Themi for a title for his talk, he gave me 3, and actually 3 subtitles, it was 6, because all of what he has to say this evening is really covered in all those titles and subtitles. One of them was Orthodox Missionary Challenges in West Africa, and we'll be talking about that. The other was the scandal of hunger and poverty, and we saw a little bit of that, and I hope to hear a lot more of it. And the other is missionary growth in West Africa, Orthodoxy and the Great Commission. But before we dive into the difficult stuff, let's talk a little bit about you and your connection with this place, because you were here, you studied here, you studied in other parts of the United States, then you went to Australia, and you taught there. That's where we became close friends. Tell us a little bit about what it's like being back here.
Well, in 1982, I was accepted here, with some difficulties actually, but I was accepted here. And
We'll talk about those later.
And I did a Master of Theological Studies, And as a result of that, I was admitted at Princeton Seminary, theological seminary. I went on to study there, and then went on to do my doctorate at Brown. And my focus was biblical theology, biblical exegesis, biblical interpretation, and so forth, and early Christianity. Of course, after that, I returned back to Australia, where we had a lot of work to do with building up a seminary, not equal, but at least in imitation of what is going on here, so that we could have a generation of priests that grew up in Australia rather than importing them from Greece, who had no idea about the local culture, who had no idea about what Australia is all about. And so there was always tension between priests that had no understanding of Australia and those who grew up there. And our aim, I'm sure, was to foster the latter. Yeah. And we've done it, actually. It's now happened.
I agree.
Yeah, 90% of the priests in Australia are born in Australia.
And many of them
and the
graduates.
And the bishops.
The bishops, that's
Nearly
true.
all the bishops are Australian born.
And also graduates of the school.
Yeah.
That's a big deal.
So that's a big step forward. Yeah, yeah.
So you've made some pretty huge transitions throughout your life. I mean, Father Luke mentioned it earlier, your transition from Marxism to Christianity. But moving from Alexandria to the Greek hub of Melbourne, you've moved from rock music to Byzantine chant, biblical scholarship. That was another thing you taught in Australia, the biblical languages, which was a first for our theological school. From biblical scholarship to the Great Commission, that we'll talk about in a little while. From the United States and Australia to East Africa and now West Africa. From Nairobi in Kenya to Freetown in Sierra Leone. And you went back full circle to Alexandria, to Africa, where you were born.
Yeah.
And you're the Bishop of Nicopolis, a famous ancient city. How do you compare, or how did your teaching prepare you for your preaching ministry, for your missionary work?
My teaching at the seminary,
Yeah,
how did it?
your studies and your teaching.
To some degrees it did, but there's a vast difference between being a professor or a lecturer at a seminary or a university, because we were also teaching at university, to being a missionary in some of the poorest parts of the world. Nothing can prepare you for that.
Right.
It really is immersion, baptism by fire. And if you stick it out and you endure it, in the beginning it's difficult, but if you just hang on, it does become easier and easier as the years go. Not easier, but more understandable, and you become more acceptable. A lot of it has to do with, are they accepting you? The local people, they have to accept you. If they don't accept you, you have a problem. And so your attitude, what you learn as a missionary is an attitude. You have to forget, the white man is going to show the way. Forget that. You are going as a servant to give what has been given to the church for 2,000 years to people who haven't heard about it. And that is the whole point. But do it as a servant. Don't do it as a colonialist, an ecclesiastical colonialist. And you will be accepted. You will be accepted.
So there's still two major transitions, though. When you left Australia, you went to Nairobi and you taught in a seminary.
Yes. But
Why did you make that transition, and how?
The patriarch told me, Kenya was an obvious choice because I wanted the transition from academic to missionary to be a little bit smoother than just, ex nihilo. So I thought if I could teach at the ecclesiastical school, at least I'll be keeping some of my training to some usage. Yeah.
That's a good point. So,
but it wasn't, of course, academically, at the frontiers of academia, but it was...
What did you do at
well,
the
I taught
seminary?
the biblical studies, New Testament, Old Testament, church history, but of course, for the needs of the people there.
How many students were there?
Well, Makario Seminary has quite a lot of students. From all over Africa they come.
50, 100?
Yeah, 50, 60, 70, depending. Yeah. I'll tell you something funny. We have a Tanzanian here? No. Good. The Tanzanians, because I'm going to make a joke. The Tanzanians, in Swahili, there is no word that ends in a consonant. Everything has a vowel at the end.
Okay.
Everything. So when our brothers from Tanzania came to Nairobi, the English words that end in consonants had to have a vowel. So, in the liturgy, let us be attentive to the gospel of Saint Johnny.
Okay, the equivalent of Irish jokes, I guess, in Africa. So, then how did you make the decision to go from there, which was still a teaching setting, to a pretty harsh missionary setting? How did that decision
Actually,
come
Kenya
about?
it's much better than Sierra Leone in terms of standards of living,
Right.
in terms of the
Right.
hospitals, the general. It's far more developed. It's a developed nation, not to the extent of the Western world, but it is developed, and they've got good hospitals, good doctors, all that. To go to a destroyed nation, totally destroyed by civil war, one of the poorest nations in the world, is a challenge. It's a challenge.
How did you decide Sierra Leone?
I decided Sierra Leone because I saw the extraordinary destruction of the nation by civil war, a barbaric civil war, that cutting of limbs off, cutting of legs off, the blood conflict diamond problem, blood diamond
yeah.
problem. And I thought, what am I doing here when over there is the crucified Christ, in the sense that you can't get any worse pain than that. So it was following the crucified Christ, in a sense. Yeah, that's what it was.
I know that means a lot to you as a symbol and as an image in your ministry. How does it work in terms of church protocol?
Well, there was no church there. There is no church.
No, but for you to get there, you spoke to the patriarch?
Oh,
or
yeah,
how did it work?
Yeah, I didn't just get up and go.
Yeah, that's what I'm wondering. How did it work out?
No,
Yeah.
I went to the patriarch and told him, we've got nothing in West Africa. We don't have any mission at all. I volunteer. I want to go there. And it had to be cleared. Actually, the patriarch decided it was a good idea. And so I left, and I went. The archbishop there wasn't completely happy with that, but it was the patriarch's decision. So I went. Yeah.
All right, so let's get into the thick of things then.
Into the politics? No.
No, not the politics. The spiritual sort of dimension of this. You call it the Great Commission.
Yes, sir.
This is what you were following.
Yes, sir.
Tell me, before we move to Sierra Leone, what is the Great Commission in your eyes as far as we are concerned here?
Well, that's the big challenge. The first and biggest challenge is the Great Commission in terms of external missionary work. What does that mean? You have to decide whether or not you are going to go and do what the Great Commission tells you to do, which is what? It's the last words of Jesus before the ascension. And the last words of a person who's about to enter the next, death or the next realm, so to speak, is always considered to be a testament, a berith in Hebrew. So the last words of a person departing from this world have great weight in Hebrew literature and intertestamental literature. We have the Testament of Job, the apocryphal testament of the various patriarchs. And the idea is the person who is now leaving gives his final words, his final commandment. So it's no accident that Christ chose, in the Matthean tradition, the synoptic tradition, the farewell discourse is, I'm going to my Father, but you are going to go and spread the gospel all over the world and baptizing in the name of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. So this is his last will. It's serious for the Lord. It's very serious. He waited to the end to say it, and therefore it has great weight.
So therefore, we as a church cannot treat it lightly. It is a very important imperative, a dominical imperative. It is very important. But it looks like, and I say this with due respect, that we are not really a very missionary church at the moment. When you consider that, as I was saying in class today, in 1911, we had 14% or 15% of the global population was Orthodox. Today, it's 4%. We are shrinking. We are shrinking, okay? Where are we growing? We are growing in Central America and Africa. Full stop. Full stop.
For someone who doesn't go to Sierra Leone, how does the Great Commission hold?
Well, then, as I was saying today, then we do internal mission. Internal mission. In other words, why is it that we are only addressing one minority group, one ethnic group? Why is it that the whole one Catholic and Apostolic Church is addressing only one ethnic group? Well, that doesn't make sense. And in fact, it's a heresy. It's called philitism. Okay? So therefore, we are to go out and bring Americans, Vietnamese, Italians, Mongolians, Japanese. It's one Holy Catholic Church. Otherwise, we're not one Holy Catholic. We're one Holy Catholic Greek Church. Or not Catholic, Greek. You know what I mean?
Thank you.
If we are to take the Lord's words seriously, then I think what Father Luke is doing, internal mission, having churches specifically to draw in a multitude of ethnicities, God bless him. That's the future of the church.
Okay, thank you. No, that's perfect. That's
Now
exactly
that I've
what I
got
think.
myself in trouble, any other questions?
No.
Okay.
There's much hotter questions coming up.
Oh, really?
So what did you do? You caught a plane to Freeport?
Oh, well, I went to the Petroglyph from Melbourne to Alexandria. Then, I flew from Cairo, Egypt Air, to Nairobi.
Okay.
And there was nobody there to greet me, so I had to find my way to the seminary.
Okay. And from there to
And
Freeport?
from there, I lived in the seminary.
But when you went to Sierra Leone?
Oh, again, I flew Kenyan Airways from Nairobi to Freetown via Accra.
Who was there to greet you?
Nobody, because oh no, I'll tell a lie. I went to the embassy, to the Sierra Leone embassy in Nairobi. I went to the Liberian embassy and because there's also nothing in Liberia. And I was convinced by the Sierra Leone embassy that they would give me more, so to speak, attention if I went there. So indeed, not the ambassador, but his deputy flew with me to Sierra Leone and took me to the president. So on my first couple of days, I met the president of Sierra Leone. And he said, well, he gave me some advice. And he asked what I would do there. I told him what I would do. He says, you have our support. Go ahead. So I had the blessings of the president, which was very good.
For
no
those
money.
of us,
it wasn't a question of money.
Right. But at least they knew you were there.
Yeah.
So for those of us here in America who really know the map as far as New Hampshire and Maine, tell us a little bit about where exactly Sierra Leone is on the west coast.
It's on the Horn of Africa. If you know Africa, it's got that bulge that comes out on the Atlantic Ocean.
That's right.
In fact, between Brazil and the Cape Verde, or the closest to America, is Brazil for the Americas. It's not that far away, actually.
Interesting. Wow.
And so, so it's at that edge there. We have Sierra Leone. The name Sierra Leone means the mountain of the lion, Sierra de Leone in Portuguese, because when the Portuguese were exploring that area, they noticed that what is now called Freetown, there is a couple of mountains that look like sitting lions. And so they wrote it down. When you come to the place of the sitting lions, then you enter into the Gulf of so-and-so. So they had mapped it out already. Yeah.
Okay, so you had the blessing of the patriarch. You had
Absolutely.
The blessing of the president.
Absolutely.
And you had no one else there. You were on your own, basically.
I brought from Kenya a deacon, And I brought, I mean, they came in stages, but I brought a deacon and I brought a chanter and my driver from Kenya and a car.
And there's no infrastructure.
Nothing.
There's no manual to go by.
Right.
Tell us how you start a mission
Well, that's
from
very
scratch.
good. What Father is saying is very important. There is no orthodox manual on how to do it. When you want to start a mission, how do you do it? Well, there's no manual. So the only thing I had was St. Paul, the great missionary, the greatest missionary, who said in his letter to the Corinthians that to the Greek he became Greek, to the Jew he became Jewish, to the weak he became weak, to the strong he becomes strong. He becomes all things to all people that he may bring them to Christ. So that's the classical missionary formula and principle, the chameleon principle. You change your color according to the environment. Or the Odyssean, as some scholars call it, because Odysseus in Homer's Odyssey is able to adapt to different situations and comes out winning by adaptation. So this Odyssean or chameleon principle is number one for missionary success. So, so you learn the local language, you learn local habits, and you learn what to avoid, what is taboo, what is not taboo, how to make jokes in the local culture without, nobody laughing like here sometimes.
It's also Australian jokes, they just don't get them.
Oh, okay. Okay. All right.
Since Cyril and Methodius?
Cyril and Methodius copied St. Paul by not bringing a Greek culture or a Byzantine so much as a Slavic. They respected the local culture. That's huge. That's huge. And it's so obvious, They even gave them an alphabet, for crying out loud, the Cyrillic alphabet. What more do you want than that? And they studied, they prepared themselves for that mission. They didn't just go ex nihilo. They were prepared, but local language, the Bulgarian language, Old Slavonic language. And so, that is very important. The principle of adaptation to the local culture.
So I want to talk about adaptation in a minute, but tell me about some of the challenges. If you had no church, no infrastructure, no priests, no chanters, no teachers, no carpenters, where did you start? How did you start?
Well, the first thing that hits you when you enter Sierra Leone is the weather. It's centigrade 30 on an average.
Wow.
I don't know what Fahrenheit, that's about 90,
40,
isn't it?
That's 90, yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
So please feel sorry for me from -0 here to 30 there,
Yeah.
Anyway. So the first thing is the weather. It's stifling hot
And humid.
bravo. And every time I do a liturgy, I am not joking, ladies and gentlemen, I sweat so much with all these amphia that are European-centered amphia. Nobody asked the Africans how to do amphia, Nobody asked, particularly the bishops, sacco. Trust me, it's heavyweight stuff, So I come out drenched. After each liturgy. It's like have mercy on me just before you start the liturgy, because you know what awaits you, right? So the weather is a big challenge, And then the local diseases, we do have them. Malaria is the biggest killer. I've had malaria, and so that was my rite of passage, so to speak. And then the other rite of passage was Ebola. So it's something light like Ebola, just to make you.
So you came to America during that crisis, right?
I didn't bring Ebola.
No, I know you didn't.
Although,
but you were.
No, I just came straight after.
Straight after.
And when I landed in New York
They
or
treated
Newark,
you like a
whatever
criminal,
it was,
yeah.
I went through a trial. I was given mask. I was given temperature. Take my temperature 3 times a day, and I had to report to the Center for Communicable Disease, CCD or something.
CDC, yeah.
If 3 times a day I would call them and tell them my temperature.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. And so there you are. So diseases is a big problem. Tuberculosis is very frequent there. And of course, water, things like clean water. We don't have like, you know, a system here, there, having running water. You have to provide yourself with tanks from the rain and from underground, or buying water, things like that, you know.
What about financial challenges of the people there and your own mission?
Financial?
Yeah.
That's the biggest problem I have, is the financial problem, that how do you run a mission that with 100 people working for you, priests, security guards, teachers, lecturers, or carers for the orphans. That's our school there, one of our schools. And all that, it takes money. And so what happens, and this is the cross that I have to bear, that quite a number of time in the year, I have to be overseas begging. And instead of being there, I have to go to Australia. Occasionally I come here, or I may go to Greece, where it's basically begging time, you know. And that's a problem, because what happens when there's an economic crisis? What happens when COVID comes and the boundaries, you can't cross borders? It's a problem. So what we are thinking is now income generating projects locally there. The Catholic Church has got incredible investments in Africa, a tobacco company, tobacco farms, you name it, so that the Church of Kenya, the Catholic Church of Kenya, doesn't have to worry about getting money from Italy or the Vatican. They may even help the Vatican, because they have their own local, I'm talking about the Catholic Church. They feed cigarette
companies?
The Catholic Church.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They actually support cigarette companies.
No comment.
Okay, but you have incense, I take it. That's the closest. The incense is the closest.
Yeah, well, it's...
What about the financial instability of the country itself, and even the corruption?
But, well, of course, you cannot expect any money from anybody there. So we don't have a plate that we hang around, you know, we pass around for money in liturgy. If anything, we give out money rather than getting money. So there is no money to be gotten from the local people. It would be shameful if we were to take money from the local people.
The government?
The government doesn't give any money. The government doesn't have the money to give, you know. There is no social welfare system. It's yeah.
So tell us the good news then. What you have done, what you have brought there.
Can I tell you some more challenges?
Yes, sure.
No, one that will interest people here. Mm-hmm. Have you heard of voodoo?
Yes.
Juju. Okay. The home of voodoo is where we are. That's where voodoo came from. Okay. It's called juju.
Yes.
And there's a lot of superstition that even some of my priests still hang on to this ancient tradition of juju. During election time, national election time, we have to protect our children in our schools, because it is not unheard of to have child sacrifice in order to win an election. I hope it doesn't come here, this, you know, but there is child sacrifice that is performed.
Okay. That's amazing. Wow.
So we have to be careful during national elections not to allow our children to be taken home from school by somebody that we're not aware of. So yeah, that's another challenge. You know, it's a dramatic challenge. Child protection is a very big deal. The child trafficking, for example, you know, where people come in and say they are taking children somewhere, you know, to help them, and in fact they end up being fodder on the international market. So that's another
You mentioned
issue.
your clergy. How many clergy do you have?
7 and 2 deacons.
And you've ordained them?
Not I, but the metropolitan.
The local metropolitan?
Yeah.
You can ordain?
I can now, yes.
How, you spoke of this Chameleon principle, or Decian principle. How does that apply to the local culture? What changes has it meant for you in terms of the voodoo priests?
Well, for example, if I'm going to say peace be with you, I will say have a cool heart. That's one
That is pretty
adaptation.
cool.
It's true. That's how you say "peace be with you"
Wow.
in Creole.
Okay.
Yeah. I was going to try tonight and share. I thought I'd better not.
What other
That's one
assistance do you
example.
have?
Linguistically,
That's linguistic, yeah.
yeah. Like for example, the knife is the cutlass. The floor is the deck. So that's from Old English.
Okay.
When the English arrived
Okay.
there, and yeah.
What about churches, church buildings, architecture,
Look,
music?
Let me tell you this. This is a very good question. I've raised it before in the class this afternoon. The Orthodox worship style is structured and formal, and it's European-based and Middle Eastern-based, but it's not African-based. In other words, when we worship God, there is a particular body language that we use, which is the lowering of the head, the hands in the front, and a kind of a submissive position before God. That makes sense to us as Europeans. It makes sense. But to an African, that is not exactly how you worship God. You worship God by the body language of joy, the body language of dance, the body language of emotion and excitement, right? So a lot of our Orthodox challenges is, how do you make an African feel welcome or feel at home in an Orthodox structured, formal setting? They will find our liturgies boring because they can't participate, they can't express themselves. So we have to understand that and adapt to it. And as I was saying today, at some point there will be a unique African Orthodox style, as there is a Russian Orthodox style, as there is Slavonic style, a Greek style.
It's developing.
It will emerge. It will definitely emerge. And it will be quite exciting, actually. There will be a lot of spontaneity to it. There'll be dance to it. There'll be body movement, you see. So the way I overcome it now is by giving a haircut to the matins, cutting it right down as much as possible, and then doing the liturgy, but during the liturgy expanding the sermon, because they're so used to the Pentecostals. The Pentecostals are full of people. Thousands go to the Pentecostals. So I emphasize the sermon, but the sermon has to be emotional. It can't be academic. It has to hit the heart, you know, and it has to invite participation. Like they will, during the sermon, shout out hallelujah and so forth. And then after the Holy Communion, then I would allow drums to come in and let them do their own version of the chants, their own African version. So we are trying to Africanize as much as possible without compromising theologically the liturgy.
What are your church buildings like?
Oh, they're like here. They're like here. We build proper churches, yeah. In the beginning, it wasn't. In the beginning, we're just, made out of tin sheds, in the beginning. But now, thank God, we've... See that, Father? That's called Crew Bay. We've built a school right in the worst slum. This is the beginning of the school. This is how the school looks like. Have a look at that. That school, Evangelismos, is in one... Look at it now. It's one of the poorest areas on the globe, and we've managed to build such a school.
Tell me about your personnel, the people that you have around you working with you.
Well, the people around me are the priests, my sister Mary.
You said how many? 7 priests?
Yep, and 2 deacons.
2 deacons.
My sister, my blood sister Mary, she's there.
She's a nun?
She's not a nun. I don't want controversy. She's a deaconess. All right, now that's what...
I was getting to that.
Yeah. Hello?
I didn't say anything.
Somebody clapped.
She is a deaconess?
She's a deaconess. I'll tell you how it happened.
Yeah.
The patriarch came, and we were doing a liturgy. And when a patriarch is around, you really got to be careful what you say, how you do it, blah, blah, blah. So I was concentrating on the liturgy in the Yero. He was on the throne, but it was a big church, so it was far away from the Yero, in a sense. And he, apparently, I didn't see it. I didn't even know what was going on. He called my sister. He brought her forward to the throne, and he told her to kneel. Mary thought he wanted something, a glass of water or something. She didn't know why she was being called.
You should have some water, please. No, I'm serious, please.
Okay, I will in a minute. And then he said, she says, what's going on here? So he put the petrahelion on and made her a deaconess.
Beautiful.
Now, but deaconess, not in the liturgical sense, but right now it's stage one, where she has a right to enter the hero, she has a right to, be part of she can maybe help with the handkerchief under the communion.
She's a teacher, right?
She's a teacher.
So she teaches?
Yeah.
She preaches?
No, we have, no.
But she'll help education.
She chants. She's allowed to chant,
Okay.
yeah.
Wonderful. That's amazing. Tell me about how you are able to collect money for all these projects that you...
Well, I'm a beggar. I'm a professional beggar, unfortunately.
And your main sources are in Australia, in America?
90% of the money I raise is from Australia. I thank publicly Archbishop Makarios for allowing me to be able to go all over Australia, all over, from Darwin to Adelaide to Perth to up north, Brisbane, Gold Coast, Sydney, Melbourne, you name it. I'm allowed to go anywhere. Yep. So it's thanks to him. And so in that way, I'm able to raise just enough to keep the whole thing going, but not to develop any further. Hence why I came to America.
Yeah, well, I hope that, I'm sure people want to support from America, and I think you should also reach out in Greece. I know that it's a sensitive
The problem with
issue,
Greece is that the other metropolitans don't have Australia and America.
Right.
So I don't want to sound benevolent, but I sort of let them pick on Greece.
There are people in Greece that want to hear about Sierra Leone.
I know, but I try not to take too much from Greece because they've got to feed all the other metropolises of Africa. Yeah.
That's very kind of you. Geopolitical challenges.
Geopolitical.
Tell us about the Ukraine war and how that's affected this situation. You talked about it briefly this evening at
Look,
Chapel.
I'm not going to take sides now. I'm not going to be political, okay? The war is complicated. It's a complicated war. So I'm not going to talk about the war. What I'm going to talk about is this, that Alexandria had a choice, the Patriarchate, of either siding with Moscow or Constantinople. Constantinople made a break by acknowledging the local church in Ukraine. Well, you know this more than I do. And therefore breaking the historical ties with Moscow. Alexandria was faced now what to do. Shall we back Moscow or shall we back Constantinople? The Patriarch had to agonize over that. And even I gave my little piece of information. When I was asked, I said, let's stay neutral. Let's stay neutral. But the Holy Synod decided to go with Constantinople. That's a decision. And as a result, now Moscow has established in Africa the Holy Russian Exarchate of Africa. Mm-hmm. And so now for the first time in the history of the Orthodox Church in Africa, we have two jurisdictions. Hitherto, there was only one. It was the only continent in the whole world where there's only one jurisdiction. It was a miracle. So whether you were from Kenya, Uganda, Chad, South Africa, Sierra Leone, Congo, it was only one jurisdiction. And in Nairobi, for example, during the Soviet period, many Kenyan men studied in Leningrad and Stalingrad and so forth, and they married Russian ladies, and they brought them back to Nairobi. So right now in Nairobi, you will find many Russian women. But now with the coming of the Russian church, they're not going to stay in the Greek church, they're going to go over to the Russian church, you see. And so we are at that tension. But Africa is divided up into spheres of influence. there is now a reaction there's an awakening in Africa of nationalism. And there is an anti-Western, as you know, an anti-Western phronema that is now arising in Africa. And they are reacting against the West. They kicked out the French, for example, in Chad, in Burkina Faso, and another one escapes, Niger. They kicked out the French. They kicked out the Americans in a base there. The Russians have come in. The Chinese are the controlled Africa. The Chinese build roads, they build bridges, they build railway lines, and they don't come in and lecture. They don't come in and say, oh, you must do this for this particular group, you must do this, and you must take care of the lesbians or the transvestites and so forth. They don't talk that way, and they don't lecture them. Whereas the Africans believe that the West comes to lecture them.
Yeah.
We kind of have a moral superiority.
Right.
It's sort of moral colonialism, right. Moral neo-colonialism. Right. Or we are somehow morally superior. And don't you think the African realizes that? So to that degree, that has caused a lot of pushing away of the Western world and the acceptance of China and Russia. Yeah. So we've got to learn how to deal with the African people.
So I see that the impact on Africa, and I certainly see the impact of, say, the Russian Church on the Patriarchate of Alexandria.
And they have an advantage, because the African remembers that when we in the West were encouraging apartheid in South Africa, when we in the West had put Nelson Mandela in jail, when we in the West were supporting a colonial power in Africa, when we killed Patrice Lumumba, we, the Belgians, when the Belgians killed 20 million people in Congo, nice, cuddly Belgium, right? The Africans remember that.
Yeah.
They remember that. Now, the only advantage we have as an Orthodox church is that we've never had colonies in Africa. But the Russians have an advantage because they would help during the Soviet period. They would help
financially too.
In Mozambique and Congo and so forth. And the Cubans too, they played a very big role. It's interesting that when we had Ebola, the first doctors to come were the Cubans. Imagine.
Amazing.
So, yeah.
So I take it you don't have Greek flags, too many Greek flags in Sierra Leone?
Greek flags? What, I don't get that.
In the Patriarchate of Alexandria, there are a lot of missionary churches that...
You say Greek flags?
Flags.
Flags?
Yes.
Simea?
Simeas.
Why?
Well, because in a lot of the missions in Africa, we see young black kids dressed in blue and white.
Okay. Well, that would be probably metropolitans born in Greece and
right.
who have
because
that,
you said we don't have Greek
that
colonialism.
Greek sentiment.
Right.
Well, I'm not guilty of it.
No, that's what I'm asking.
I'm not guilty of it. But
inferring.
if others are, it's kind of, how can I put it? We have a long way yet to go.
So has the war in Ukraine affected you in Sierra Leone?
No, because Sierra Leone is an American sphere of influence, right? But where there is a Russian sphere of influence and a Chinese sphere of influence, they would have an advantage, the Russian Orthodox Church, yeah.
So before I close and give you a last word as well, I'd like to see if there are any questions from the audience and perhaps close with a few more minutes of your film.
Well, I do want to close on the following note, that, as I said in the chapel, if you're not there, that 20,000 people die every day of hunger, every day, or hunger-related diseases that arise out of hunger. What we don't know is that we don't put a face to that, whereas we do sympathize when we talk about European deaths. Like, for example, we all feel guilty that 6 million Jews were killed in the Second World War. We really feel, horrible about it. How can that happen from a European nation, a sophisticated German nation? How would they do that? It sounds incredible, and yet they did. Okay, so we all kind of have a collective guilt about that. But then when you hear that 6 million Congolese were killed during the last 20 years in a war, I don't even think you know about it. It's number one. Number two, when King Leopold of Belgium in the early part of the 20th century, within 1 year or two, killed 20 million Congolese, who cares? Yeah. You see, so we're very selective about whom we feel sorry for. And we're very selective about whom we feel guilty over. It doesn't seem that we're very guilty that the Europeans, what they did to Africa, we don't seem to be guilty about that. So...
Well, I want to ask you a final question about that, but just out of curiosity before doing that, you mentioned the Roman Catholic Church and, you know, Peter Stuyvesant cigarettes. I'm just wondering, do you
I think he was a Protestant, he wasn't Catholic.
Oh, was it? Okay.
He remember, he bought New York for beads.
That's right. Ecumenical relations, do you have connections with other Christian churches?
That's a very good question. You know, I tried that, and what happened was, because they know that I have backings from overseas, the minute I tried to join it, right, I got hit with, oh, my parish needs this and my parish needs that. Yeah. So I thought, let me first establish the Orthodox Church. Let's make sure we are on terra firma, and then join them, because I know what will happen. I'll become somebody that has to help.
So let me close with this question, because people tend to overemphasize these major transitions in your life from Marxism to Christianity. A lot, I know St. Francis was a major influence in your life.
So was Mother Teresa.
So was Mother Teresa. Yeah. I know that you stood up against the war in Vietnam.
Yep.
I know that in many ways, from your youth and through your ministry, you've had this almost counter-cultural, it's a very Aussie kind of an attitude as well. But so in some ways, all of the stuff you've spoken about this evening shows me that I don't know that it's been a major transition. I think in many ways you've carried with you
Brother Themi
with a cross.
Yeah.
With in Golpion now.
Yeah, disguised as a bishop.
No, I didn't mean disguised at all. But maybe you don't need to get rid of everything in your past.
Have a look, Father. This is the reality of Africa.
Yep.
That's the reality. There's no glamour. People think it's glamorous. You know, there's no glamour at all. It's
the
hard
glamour
work.
of the Great Commission.
Yeah.
Are there any questions? Can we put the lights on, Andoni? Just
lights on,
two or three select questions. Yeah, let's express our gratitude.
Shall I end with the video?
We will end. Let's have a couple of questions, and then we'll end with the video. So, 2 or 3 questions. Please make them brief. Ben.
That reality of Africa we're seeing here, what has that taught you about your faith, and given that you're bringing orthodoxy to a world that isn't orthodox, what are you gaining from experiencing that, from seeing those people live their life?
Well, if you believe, and I believe, that we are an apostolic church that goes back to the time of Christ, if you believe that, and since at least the Church of Alexandria having been established by St. Mark way back in the apostolic period, then we are surely giving our African brothers and sisters the original church, the original African church, which was established in North Africa 2,000 years ago, as opposed to the Pentecostals 20 years ago, or opposed to the Presbyterians 500 years ago. But we bring apostolic succession, we bring the New Testament canon. I mean, it's the church fathers that decided on the 27 books of the New Testament. We have a history that we bring to Africa that is their history. It's their history. All the missions of the great fathers of Alexandria, from Origen to Clement to Athanasius to Cyril, I don't know if you know this, but apparently, Father, you're a patristic scholar, I'm told that every time the the Alexandrian representatives would enter into a council, the rest would stand up. Is that true? That's what I heard.
I don't know.
Well, that's up to the 6th century anyway, up to before the fall of Alexander.
Well, the title of the patriarch as well is Pope.
Yeah,
so.
I know.
Any more questions? Yes, on the left here.
Yeah, for those of us who don't have the benefit of sitting in a classroom and hearing your story and how you became a Christian, an Orthodox Christian, could you give us a few highlights of your testimony?
A testimony about what?
About going from being an atheist, a rock star, to becoming a Christian, and a fervent one at that.
Yeah. Well, I have a whole video on that if you want to Google it or, but in the meantime, I'll make it very brief for you. The last thing in the world that you would have told me when I was going to a party with Mick Jagger would be that one day I would be a papas tiselinikis ecclesias. You tell me, that would waving a Greek flag, okay? That would be, honestly, I would have fallen on the floor and cursed the day I was born. That's how much I was anti-church. And becoming a Marxist made me really so anti-church, I can't tell you, because I identified the church with the exploitation of the proletariat, with the working class. That the church, according to Marx, is giving the people some dreams and some illusions that they will suffer here in order to gain elsewhere. So I believed all that, okay? But the way that I changed was not by logic, but by experience. I went to, I was guided by a guru. I went into the Indian phase, the sitar stage, the Ravi Shankar stage, and I was seeking nirvana, okay? But what happened in one of my nirvana seeking sessions was the guru asked me to remove a cross that I was wearing as a fashion statement. Black Sabbath wore crosses, Led Zeppelin wore crosses. It's just a fashion thing, right? And so I was just imitating them. And when he came to me and he was saying, he was giving people, tapping on the forehead, receive knowledge, receive knowledge, receive knowledge. I was waiting for knowledge to come, and he's about to tap me on the forehead when he noticed the cross. And when he noticed the cross, he said to me in his heavy Indian accent to remove the cross. And I wondered, this guru that represents the avatar is bothered by my Black Sabbath symbol. What's going on here? Well, that started the hard drive ticking. And from then on, I started reading more about what's this Christianity all about. St. Augustine came into play, the New Testament, and before you knew it, I had some kind of experiences also, which convinced me that Christ is a reality and that the whole issue of the kingdom of heaven is real, that what Christ said is absolutely true, and the evidence for the existence of Christ is far greater than the evidence for, wait for this, Alexander the Great. The nearest attestation of Alexander's life comes from Plutarch 300 years later. So whereas with Christ, the attestations are from the Romans themselves, Suetonius and the others, Philo. They talked about the existence of Christus. It comes from the same time, 10, 20 years later. So there's far more evidence historically that Christ existed than Homer, Socrates, which I believe they did exist. I believe Socrates existed. But I'm just, from a historical perspective, there's more evidence for Christ. Yeah.
Dimitri?
Yeah, so thank you very much, Bishop Themi, for such... Thank you very much, Bishop Themi, for such a beautiful talk, an example of servant leadership. I hate taking time from students, but I have to ask this question because I think it would be important for all of us to hear it. Many times we falter before the face of evil or before the face of extreme suffering, and you're confronted with it on a daily basis. Could you tell us how you continue, both from an intellectual perspective, like how do you reconcile this in your mind with the work that you're doing, but more importantly, how do you reconcile it internally with your heart? How do you keep moving forward and not just throw your hands up or get so angry that you walk away?
That's very easy to answer. It's very easy. Once you identify Matthew 25 and make it real, once you realize that that beggar is Christ who's testing you, once you realize that that old woman who's blind and her husband has been dead and she's begging in the street, that she represents Christ testing you, then it's easy. It's easy. Because what I do is I'm surrounded a plethora of beggars whenever I come out. A plethora of beggars. I can't go out without being surrounded. Even my car, they chase the car. They know which way it is. I have people chasing me. And I tell the driver, stop, we're going to kill someone here. So I have to get out, I have to have cash on me, and I have to distribute it to everybody, you see. But I usually, what I've learned to do now is I don't distribute it to all of them. I say to them, who's your boss? Because I have leaders. And they go, oh, I'm the boss. He says, no, I'm the boss. And I said, no, one boss, okay? It's internal conflicts, you see, they have among themselves. Even the poor have politics, okay? So I decide who is the real boss. I look at them and I think, oh, this guy's probably the boss. I give him the money and I tell the rest of them, I have given him 7,000 leons, which is the currency of the day, and he will distribute. And then I send him, and then we make our getaway with the car, because they're going to be chasing us.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So
it's the crucified Christ that you look at. You don't look at that person as Mrs. So-and-so. The suffering person is for you, Christ suffering. Do something about it. And it becomes easier. It becomes easier.
Yes.
So thank you so much. I found everything you said so deeply inspiring. And I've only been here for a year in the Boston area. I go to Holy Trinity Cathedral in downtown Boston. But what I see when I look around is I don't see the presence of the Orthodox outside of the church building. And I know that many young people I speak with every Sunday, they're hungry to go out and be of service in a real, genuine way. So what might be, I know there's all kinds of suffering that is endemic in right around our neighborhoods, right? There's sex trafficking behind walls. There's poverty, there's homelessness, and yet we just walk right by them. And so what would you tell us leaving tonight? What would be the very first step? I know the first step is inwardly, like you just said, seeing everyone as a suffering Christ. I get, yes. But then what's the next step?
So we see the same sort of poverty and sex trafficking here.
Yeah.
And how is it that we should respond beyond the merely internal?
It's the same thing. It's just identify Christ with the poor. Once you've done that, it's very straightforward. The difference, however, between one and the other, sister, is the following: that in Africa we don't have a social welfare system. We don't have assistance from the government. And so if you are sick or dying or suffering, you're on your own. You're on your own. And that's where the church comes in. We are the social welfare system. We are the people who provide for the sick and so forth. Now, in America or Australia or Europe, the beggar may have something to do with alcoholism, may have something to do with drug usage. You have to determine, when you look at that person who's begging, is he because because of drugs or because of alcohol or because of genuine economic crisis. If it is a drug addict, I will still help him 100%. But I will not give him money. I will give him something I will go and buy something for him and give it to him. Okay? But if it's a sincere case of economic crisis that this person is facing, then you need to think how you can help them. Maybe not with money, but by hooking them on to the right agency that may help them. Maybe you can do something for them, put them up somewhere that you know, a friend or something. But you can't turn away from someone who's asking for help. You can't turn away. Otherwise you become like the rich man who was indifferent. He wasn't a bad man. He was just indifferent to the beggar outside his house. That cost him the kingdom of heaven. Indifference is a sin. So please don't be indifferent to the local needs. To the local needs, yes.
Thank you for the question. I'm going to have to say last question, only so that you will have an opportunity to meet with Bishop Themi outside as well during the reception. So one last question.
Your Eminence, Father, thank you so much for coming and speaking with us tonight. My question is directed to His Eminence. Earlier you were speaking about these geopolitical realities in Africa, and specifically how the church has, at least as far as orthodoxy is concerned, is divided into the Church of Alexandria and the Russian Exarchate. So in spite of these differences between the two, are there still opportunities concerning cooperation between the two to address issues like destitution, especially? Thank you.
That's such a good question. You may disagree with me. Some of you may disagree with me. Okay. I don't want to make enemies of the Russian Orthodox Church. I respect it. I respect the Russian Orthodox. I respect Russian culture. I respect Tolstoy. I respect Dostoevsky. We cannot just throw away this great nation because of what is happening now. Okay? So in my mind, I have great respect for Russian literature, the ballet of Russia and so forth. This nation is a serious nation with a serious history. If they come to Sierra Leone, and I don't know whether they will, because as I said before, it is an American sphere of influence, but if they do, I would have a dilemma and how to solve it, but I would certainly approach the people responsible, and I would try, well, of course, I have to obey my patriarchate, but I would also let it be known between the lines that I'm not their enemy. Between the lines, if you know what I mean. Wink, wink, as we say in Australia. Look, you've been told by your boss to do what you have to do. I've got my own boss to do, but you and me, we're not enemies. That would be my position, Father. You may not agree, but that would be my position.
No, I agree. And I think we should do much more for healing the schism that exists.
God bless you.
All right? But it's in the name of Orthodox spirituality, it's in the name of Dostoevsky, it's in the name of the ballet that they are slaughtering Ukrainians today. And I'm not sure I'm ready to say, let's stick with the culture, which is so refined. I think the people being slaughtered in Ukraine would beg to differ. That's all.
You know, actually,
but
the number of
churches,
the civilians that are being killed there is inexcusable.
Yes.
But it's not. Okay, don't worry about it.
No, I get it. It's just that we should, as churches, definitely be working better than we are. No question about that. Thank you.